everybody. On behalf of the Clinton Charter Reform Coalition, I'm happy to invite you here for an informational evening about the changes that have been proposed in our town charter. That you come out tonight is wonderful. It shows that your commitment to Clinton, your commitment to finding out information, your commitment to be making an informed choice when we go to the polls on November 6th. So thank you so very much. The format of tonight's presentation will have 3 parts. After I introduce our speakers, John Elsesser from Coventry and Matt Hart from West Hartford. Art Keever is sitting here, who's been a member of both of the Charter Revision Commissions and can address information to you about our charter in Clinton in particular. Our town managers will give you a glimpse with a lot of detail about what their work is as town managers, and it will give you information about how this can work in Clinton. Afterwards, they will discuss about the procedures of hiring a town manager if people vote for that to happen. What do we have to put in place? What resources would the town need? What would be the timeline to make sure that we get the most qualified candidates to apply for the job and select the person who exactly fits our needs? And after that discussion, then we'll open it up to all of your questions. Some of you are here because you just don't know if this is the right thing for Clinton. Some of you think that it would be great and you want to support that idea. Some of you may be skeptical, but you're here, and that is the best thing. And I am so happy to see you take chairs and so on. We will refrain from questions until the third part of the program so that you will be able to be informed. And so thank you so much. To start off with, I'd like to introduce our 2 town managers. This is Matt Hart. He has been the town manager in West Hartford since last July. He previously was the town manager in Mansfield. The first Charter Revision Committee of 2016 listened to Matt Hart on video, and we were so impressed by the scope, the concept, the kind of work he did, and I'm so thrilled to have him here. Matt is an Army veteran. He has a BS in political science from SUNY Potsdam, a law degree, and a Master's of Public Administration from UConn. And the quote I like best, he says, is, "At the end of the day, it's all about making a community a better place to work in, to play in, and to learn in." And so you'll have a chance to listen and meet Matt Hart. You'll also have a chance to meet John Elsesser from Coventry. He's been the town manager in Coventry since 1988. He has a BS from Bates in political science and a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Hartford. He's a credentialed manager from ICMA, and he's described as one of the leading figures in municipal government for nearly 4 decades. Active in public policy planning, on budget and taxation, economic development, labor, regionalization, and other things affecting municipalities. So we are so grateful to have them. We're so grateful to have Hart here too, who is a Clinton native, married to a Clinton native, raising 3 wonderful daughters, an IT guy of great experience, a Navy veteran who sat on 2 charter revision committees without complaining. And so, not publicly. So tonight we welcome you to this great time for information. And Matt, could you start us off, please?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. We really appreciate, John and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. And John is a longtime colleague of mine, and we look to him as he's one of the deans of town management here in Connecticut. It's really neat for me to be here in Clinton because as a small boy, I lived in the Evergreen Mobile Park on Route 81, close to the Killingworth border. for about 3 or 4 years, and I attended Glenwood School. I think it was Glenwood School. So to come back here 45 years later, it's pretty neat, and I'm glad to be here with you tonight. So we've got a PowerPoint presentation that we want to run through quickly, but we want to spend more time on your questions. So we're going to go through that quickly to just hit on some of the basics of the form of government. But before we go further, one point I want to emphasize. So we're town managers working in the council manager form of government. It's a form of government that we believe very strongly in and can work for a variety of municipalities of different sizes and complexities. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's your choice. It's the community's choice, it's the people's choice. And we have other forms of government here in Connecticut, selectmen town meeting like you have now, mayor council that other communities have. And those are very legitimate options as well. So we're not here to present any sort of hard sell. At the end of the day, it needs to be a choice that the community makes. We see a great deal of merit and strengths in the council manager forum, and that's what we want to highlight for you here this evening and take your questions. And I'm joined by one of my colleagues, another of my colleagues, Robert Lee, town manager of Plainville.
Who also was in
How you doing, Robert?
many years in Hebron and started in East Hampton. So, thought I'd introduce myself a little bit too. The accolades are well over exaggerated and embarrassing. Tenure has a lot to do with it. So after I got out of grad school, I started with the town of Wethersfield as an administrative assistant to the town manager, which meant I did a lot of annual reports, grant work, energy work, working with boards and commissions, and everything related to risk management and insurance issues. So started my career learning when an opening came in Avon for an assistant to the town manager. I went there because I went to work for who I consider the dean of managers in the state of Connecticut, a man named Phil Schenk, who retired and loved the career so much. He gave back and is now town manager for Bloomfield, Connecticut, and I don't even know how old he is.
He's retiring again, finally.
But,
He just announced.
Learning from other people is part of what makes the field well. And Matt and I have worked on a lot when he was in Mansfield. We're neighboring towns, and Matt was an assistant there, and then had the confidence of the community to be promoted to town manager, and basically built the downtown, which he'll talk about a little bit. Having some longevity does help because you know who to go to solve problems. I have been president of the Council of Small Towns. I'm incoming president of the Connecticut Conference of Municipality. I've served on more commissions for several years in the state to try to figure out how to gain efficiencies through regionalization. I was appointed to the state tax panel, which if you want to have some interesting reading, you can't fall asleep one night. We produce volumes about like that. They're available on our website, and I really do urge somebody to read them because I don't think anybody else did, but it would help solve some of the state problems that have not gone away. And currently serve as the chairman of the 911 Commission, the Public Safety Data Commission, and also serve on the Connecticut Education Technologies Commission, which oversees the Connecticut Education Network, which is a fiber optic network that runs to all our schools and public safety complexes. So it's a lot of fun, and I actually do work a lot of hours in the town of Coventry too. Coventry is a small town. We're just slightly smaller than you. We have 12,700 or so people. Our budget is a lot smaller than yours. Our population is becoming a little bit more affluent. We were much more impoverished, but basically it's two-income families, working families. We're not widely diverse. We don't have a lot of people of low income. We have almost no people of high affluence. But we're located about 12, 13 miles away out of ring of Hartford, so it's second tier out. Still have active dairy farms, very large, beautiful lake that we're very proud of, and try to keep it clean. And unfortunately, boaters don't keep their boats clean, and we have some nasty invasive species that I hope you don't get down here called hydrilla, which is coming up from the south. It grows to be about 24 feet long and can kill a lake. But anyways, we may not be doing a PowerPoint presentation because the computer hasn't showed up.
Oh, got it.
So,
Well, let me add just a little more introduction, if I can as well, John. So, I've been in the profession about 23 years now. West Hartford is the third Connecticut municipality that I've had the privilege of working in. I started in the field a little bit later than some, at about the age of 30. I was in grad school. I couldn't decide if I wanted to practice law or work in government in some fashion. I knew I was very interested in government, so I pursued both a master's in public administration as well as a law degree. And while I was in school, I got an internship with the town of Windsor, Connecticut, which is just north of our capital city in Hartford. And was able to work with just a wonderful manager, a guy by the name of Albert Ilk, who's now retired, living in my community of West Hartford. He was just a fabulous mentor, and he got me hooked. So I was with the town of Windsor about 5 years, and then I went to the town of Mansfield, John's neighbor, in 2000, and I was there about 17 years altogether as the assistant and then as the town manager. I think Mansfield is more comparable, it's certainly more comparable in size to your community than West Hartford. Mansfield, when I left, we had an operating budget of approximately $50 million, about 150 regular employees. And it's Mansfield, I hope all of you know, is home to the University of Connecticut in stores. There's actually a lot of confusion nationally, what stores versus Mansfield. Everybody knows stores because of the great Yukon Huskies, right? But they don't necessarily know that stores is part of Mansfield. And Mansfield was just a fabulous experience. As John said, had an opportunity to work on a public-private partnership where we actually built the downtown. So those of you who haven't been to Yukon for a while, I would encourage you to go on up and check it out. They've got some great restaurants and a bunch of other things too. And I started working for the town of West Hartford, a community of about 63,000 people with an operating budget of approaching $290 million, a much larger operation about 15 months ago. And West Hartford is just a fabulous place and a long tradition of the council manager form of government as well.
so Matt is a little modest. He is also serving as our regional vice president for ICMA. And I thought I'd spend a second to talk about ICMA and then Matt will finish it up. ICMA is the International City and County Managers Association. I'll try to speak up. They are our professional group. There's over 9,000 members. We passed out the Code of Ethics to you. That is our life thread. It's our standard. That's something that your elected officials don't have to. We would urge them to honor something similar to that. But it establishes what proper behavior is for a person that is a member of ICMA, kind of like the Bar Association can self-police their members. And from time to time, a couple times a year across the nation and internationally, people have to be censured or kicked out. So there's a complaint investigation process if somebody is doing something wrong. We just shared with you that because to us, it's a significant difference that we pledge to do things ethically, and those are defined, and then we actually have pages of guidance on how to define that. I didn't share that out with you, but that's the tan piece of paper. We also gave you kind of a little bit marketing on who we are and what the role is, and we can go through some of those. But to us, being an active member of ICMA connects you with your peers. It keeps you out in the open to make sure that you're making appropriate decisions, but it also, most importantly, keeps you on a lifelong learning experience. None of us know everything. The world and the career changes. My wife gets a little annoyed when we have a gathering of managers and we sit and talk about, hey, let's talk about recycling. What are you doing with recycling? But they learn to tolerate it. And there's always something new coming along, and you have to stay on top of it and ahead of it. So later on, if we have times, you can talk with some of the innovative things that we've done and some of the things that are ahead of the curve, I think, for other municipal towns. But Matt, why don't we talk a little bit about
the form?
The form.
Yeah, okay. So the form of government itself, we're approaching 110 years old. And the council manager form was born out of the progressive reform movement in government that was occurring in the late 19th century. You know, folks here, you may recall from your history classes reading about Tammany Hall and other examples. There was a lot of corruption happening in municipal government in that era. So there was a movement to clean it up. And one of the thoughts was, if we could apply business principles to local government, we could produce a much cleaner operation. You know, one that's focused on merit-based decision-making and good ethics. So the thinking was that if we could hire a professionally trained manager, not elected, but appointed by the elected officials, that we could improve things, and improve things significantly. So the way the form works, you have your town council. The town council, those are your elected officials, and there are many examples around the country. The town council, the elected officials, generally they serve without any compensation. That's not always true, but that's generally the case.
I think their charter is recommending some compensation.
Okay. So you've got an elected town council. They appoint a town manager on the basis of his or her qualifications. All right, and the town manager is professionally trained, has expertise in the local government field. And the town manager is responsible for implementing the policy set by the elected officials, the town council. And all of the department heads report to the town manager. A couple of analogies. One that's often used is that comparing council manager to a corporation. A corporation where you have the town council is somewhat analogous to a corporate board of directors, and the town or city manager is analogous to the CEO or the CAO. Another analogy that I like to use, and hits a little closer to home, is to that of a school district. So a school district, you've got your Board of Education, they hire a professional superintendent, right? A superintendent, superintendents are no longer elected. I don't think anywhere in the US. There might be a few examples. But a superintendent is a professionally trained administrator and CEO. So the council is somewhat analogous to your Board of Education, and the town manager is analogous to the superintendent of schools, but on the municipal side of the government. So hopefully those two examples are somewhat helpful to you. So some of the things that the form of government is designed to promote. So we've mentioned two already. John talked about our code of ethics. That's one of our hallmarks. You know, we need to abide by that code. If we don't, we can be sanctioned and actually face punitive action from our association. So we need to abide by that code. That's something we believe in. Another hallmark of the profession, and this really gets at the origin, is merit-based decision making. merit-based decision-making. What does that mean? That means you hire the best employee for the job based on their qualifications, his or her qualifications, not on any political connections. You hire the best contractor for the job based on their qualifications, not based on any political connections they might have. When you make presentations or when you make recommendations to the town council, we work to provide the council with options and the pros and cons of the various decisions that they make. So why don't I transition to John. John, maybe you can talk a little bit more specifically about some of the duties that a town manager would have, particularly in a smaller local government, because we often wear multiple hats as well.
So, to emphasize, the relationship between the council and the manager is a team. And the council has the policy, and the manager then implements the policy. It only works well like any other team. You have to be heading in the same direction. So when that council changes, and the town's priorities may change after an election, then the manager also has to change, because they're not running the policy of the town. So, just back up 1 second before I go into the duties of the manager. If that team doesn't work, unlike an elected official, where you have to wait their term till their term's up, there are always provisions that the manager can be asked to leave. If that team doesn't work, it's not appropriate for that person to stay there any longer. So you don't necessarily have to wait a 4-year term. I think the first selectman had a 4-year term here, if I'm wrong, or was it proposed for a 4-year term? 2? Okay. 2-year term. If it's not working, there are other options. So it's not manager for life, and I can assure you that my tenure happens to be by my choice. I've had other options. They have had some times where I've had some big swings, going from 5 Democrats and 2 Republicans to 5 Republicans and 2 Democrats. Or actually one time it's 5 Republicans and 1 Democrat, 1 unaffiliated. So you have to make adjustments, because they are the elected people that are representing the community. So we honor that. I can't emphasize that enough. But on a day-to-day basis, I have a small staff. When I was hired in 1988, I had 65 employees. I now have 67 employees. Not bad for 30 years. And those are both in the police department. So we've done other organizational ways to be innovative. Like we created a regional health district. I see you're in a health district already. So we were able to get rid of some. We've contracted out some duties. At one point we had that contracted sewage treatment plant, we brought it back in-house. At one point we had that contracted engineering services, we brought that back in-house. But there's some changes that you can make. When I was first hired, I also served as finance director. Fortunately, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was able to get a finance director on staff, and our finances operation got a lot more attention, and it was well worth the investment of it. I'm responsible for the grants in our community. On track for a record year. I'm going to be bringing in about $7 million of grants from about 15 different processes, mostly transportation grants. I've had some projects. I serve as one of the 2 staff members for Economic Development Commission. So the town planner and I work as a team for economic development. I let him work with the Planning and Zoning Commission for kind of all the day-to-day applications that you see through subdivisions and so forth, and they do the reviews. I stay out of that business, but when it comes to economic development, that has much more impact on our community, so I get involved in that. I am the HR, Human Resource Officer for the town. I have 4 collective bargaining units. I negotiate all those unions. I only bring in a labor attorney if I am unable to negotiate those unions. So I didn't look up your attorney fees, but I think you also find that in manager towns, the attorney fees are much lower. Last year, our total expenses for town attorney and our labor attorney was about $72,000 a year. I've seen other towns where that's several $100,000 a year because everything gets forwarded off to attorneys. I think Bob, Matt, and I can write those simple contracts, and sometimes we run them through, and sometimes it's been run through enough that you don't have to have them look at it. But you know, we have enough law courses. Obviously, he's a lawyer too, that we can do those duties. So that's important. Don't hire a lot of consultants. In my 30 years, we've only had really 3 or 4 consultants in. 3 of those had to do with our 2 volunteer fire departments that don't like each other, and how to deal with those issues. So we're still working on those, but major changes are coming. The town took over the volunteer ambulance to get it out the door, and so we're running that with a contracted per diem staffing agency, so we didn't have to hire more employees. But we've got our response time down by 4.5 minutes per call by doing that. And that's what it's all about. So every day, you know, I'm the person that people come in and complain to, and they have a drainage problem or a road problem. My style, I personally have a style that I call management by wandering around a little bit. I walk through the town hall, make sure that my staff knows who I am, that if they have an issue, they can catch me instead of having to come and make an appointment. So it's day-to-day contact with my staff. The staff that's not in the town hall, I have weekly or bi-weekly meetings, so I meet with the Public Works Director and Town Engineer every other week to go over our projects, make sure we're on the same team, make sure that we push that down the road, that we're not waiting for anybody, because there's lots of approval processes in that. But I'm the person that gets called when they have citizen complaints, and I'm sure that happens in your office too. So I think we can get into more specific questions, but we are, even though we're small, we're full service town. I have youth services, human services, recreation. Our rec program is pretty much self-funded. The total assets that the taxpayers pay for is about $70,000, which pays for most of the rec director and subsidy for beach lifeguards. We have 2 beaches. Everything else is fee-based and generates and pays for some of the staff. So there's lots of ways that you can provide a wide breadth of services without having it all in a tax bill.
Good. Thank you, John. So the commission sent us some questions in advance, so why don't we cover those first, then we'll open it up to the audience. So the first question was, how does the town manager work with the council, the staff, and the union? So I'll take a stab at that, and then John can add to my response. So first of all, working with the council, the town manager is the town council's chief advisor. Typically, under a municipal charter, a town manager has the right of full participation at council meetings, with the exception of the right to vote. Only council members can vote. I talked earlier about how the town council makes the big policy decisions. Well, what are those? In most instances, they're similar to the big decisions that the Board of Selectmen has to wrestle with now. Town council is responsible for adopting the annual budget, modifying what's proposed by the town manager. Town council sets the tax rate. Town council is responsible for adopting local ordinances and regulations, etc. Those are some examples of the big policy decisions that a town council would make. So the manager's job is to support all of the members of the council, whether it's 5, 7, or 9, regardless of what party they're in. However, the manager always has to respect a decision made by a majority of councilors. So if there's a contentious issue in front of the council, let's say it's a development project, what have you, It's the town manager's job to provide the council with the information they need to make a good decision. The council may have an opinion or a recommendation that the council ultimately doesn't adopt. The council may decide differently. It's the manager's job, though. The manager needs to respect the will of the council and implement the council's decision as long as it's lawful.
So part of that, we all have practices, and I'm sure Matt has the same practice, that if I'm giving information to one council member, it goes to every council member.
Yeah.
So that there's equal respect and equal, if you want everyone to make a decision, they ought to all have the same information.
Yeah, on that point, I'll often get an email from one of my two caucuses. You know, perhaps it's Republicans, Democrats, what have you. I'll get an email from one of them. They copy their caucus members, and they're asking me to respond. And I explain, okay, I'm going to respond, but this information is going to all nine. And that's how we handle it, because it's our job, again, to support the full council. So working with the staff, the town or city manager, the department heads, police chief, fire chief, public works director, parks and rec director, in many cases, town clerk, library director, they report to the town manager. There are direct reports. The other employees are part of the civil service, the classified service, reporting to those various department heads. However, as John talked about, it's a good and healthy practice for the town manager to be connected with the larger workforce. And we do that by getting out there, visiting job sites, walking through the halls, walking to their workplaces, attending staff meetings, and connecting with people. I have a weekly meeting with all of my direct reports. We meet every week to talk about current issues, and I have a monthly meeting with what we call our leadership team. The leadership team gets down to the next level. It includes middle managers as well. So those are some, another technique that I use for all of my direct reports. All of my direct reports, I also have monthly one-on-one meetings with them. Monthly one-on-one meetings. And we set goals for their year, performance goals for their year. So they're going to have assignments, they're going to change throughout the year, but every month they come in and meet with me and give me a status report as to where they are working on their various assignments. And I'm there to help them obtain resources, problem solve, etc. In terms of working with the unions, as John said, in smaller communities, and I did this in Mansfield as well, the manager is typically the chief spokesperson, the chief labor spokesperson for the town, and is responsible for negotiating collective bargaining agreements with the union. Another practice we typically employ is we hold regular labor management meetings. That's something I did in Mansfield and something I brought to West Hartford as well, where periodically we sit down with the representatives from the bargaining unit to talk about items of mutual concern, but also to talk about potential problems, potential grievances, etc., so that we can attempt to solve them in advance, right, before they become a bigger problem. And it's just an opportunity to have a good, healthy dialogue with the members of the collective bargaining unit as well.
So I think part of our goal is to, with the unions, to understand, build that relationship where you understand that there are some issues you're just not going to agree to. But to still have a level of respect for them, that when you have a disagreement, it doesn't have to go as far as it's necessary as it may otherwise go. Because that's a waste of energy, it's a waste of resources, and a waste of time. So you try to resolve a lot of the issues without ever giving away the store. So there are issues of principle that you cannot give up. I haven't had a union grievance in 4 years from 4 collective bargaining units. When it comes to pensions, managers or the chief elected official also have to negotiate the pensions for the non-certified Board of Ed employees. So I was able to work with 9 different ASPE units. It took about 1.5 years to renegotiate our pension plan, to raise the retirement age from 62 to 65, change vesting to 10 years, and get a variable contribution based on how the plan performs every year that can vary up to 0.5% a year. So it can go up and it can go down. But we're able to do that, and within 3 years, we were able to increase our fund balance in the pension plan by 15%. They liked that. We had a common goal. They want a sound pension plan as much as we do. Not easy. I respect them for being willing to give up what they did, and for some people that meant they had to work another 3 years. But they could then go knowing that they had a longer, more viable pension plan. And to our taxpayers, it reduced the expenses dramatically. We've worked with unions on innovative insurance plans. We went self-insurance. We're a small town to do self-insurance, so we merged and went together with 4 other towns, 4 other boards of education, and our service education district in our area called EastCon. The state has various education, regional education service districts. So we created the first self-insurance pool for municipalities and boards of education in the state. We've been in existence for 7 years. Last year, we had a 0 increase. The year before was a 7% decrease. The year before was a 0 increase, and we're going for 0 again. We have a lot of money in there. Because with that, we redesigned the plan to do wellness initiatives. The collaborative also was able to cut expenses dramatically because we pulled out our stop loss protection. And I'm sorry if I'm getting too technical, but that's when we say we're not going to pay any claim over $150,000. That goes into this broader pool. But we're able to go to private markets in Boston and get another carrier that says if it's over $150,000, they step in. And by having a big enough pool, we're able to save dramatic money. But our carrier, Cigna, which I noticed you have here for several unions too, also kicked in a lot of wellness money to bring an free employee assistance program that does everything from financial counseling to drug addiction issues to smoking cessation and all the stressors that people have in life these days. So we have free referrals to those agencies, all provided through our healthcare that has not gone up. So a lot of actions when you take the time and work together with other regional players that you can make things that work. Obviously, our council had to approve that because that's a policy.
Yeah. Yep. So let's get to the second question, and there are 4 altogether, and then we're going to get to questions from the audience. Second question is, how does a town manager prepare budgets to ensure a community operates in a fiscally sound manner? So a typical municipal budget in Connecticut has 3 components. There's the Board of Education or the school district, and in Connecticut that's typically the largest share of the budget. Secondly, there's a budget for municipal government, that's all the municipal departments. And then third, there's generally a budget for capital equipment and facilities. Typically there's a capital component as well. So town managers are charged with preparing an annual budget and capital plan for the legislative body, the town council, to consider. And in Connecticut, generally the time frame is we'll present a proposed budget to the council in sometime in March, maybe early April. The town council will review it for a month or 2, and it varies by community as to whether or not it needs to go to town meeting or to a referendum. And in my town, my new town of West Hartford, the council adopts the budget. But our work begins far before that, right? Far before that. And actually, we're working on the budget almost year round. So in the fall, generally, we'll begin talking to our department heads, giving them general guidelines as to general guidelines that they need to use in preparing their proposed departmental budgets for the town manager to consider. And we're going to get some direction from our town council in doing that. So generally, I like to hold a budget retreat with the council in the late fall, maybe early winter. We can talk about where we are in the middle of the fiscal year and our projections for the following year, and seek some general guidance from the council as to what they're looking for in the upcoming fiscal year. What sort of guidance? Well, are they generally happy? Do they want us to maintain current services and programs? Or do they want us to bring a current services budget forward? Are they interested in more of a zero-based budget? Are there new programs that they'd like to consider? That helps inform us in preparing the budgets with our respective departments. So the department heads will prepare a budget, present it to the town manager. We're going to critique it pretty closely, probably make some number of adjustments to it, and then ultimately present it to the town council for consideration. The general guidance I received in Mansfield, particularly over the last 10 years coming out of the recession, the council was interested in a current services budget, but they didn't want to add programs. They didn't want to add programs. They were very concerned about adding positions. They were very concerned about taxes, and that's something we always work to consider, is what's going to be the financial burden on our residents. Because Connecticut, as you all know very well, we are extremely reliant on the property tax, right? The property tax is our main game. We get some grants from the state, and we can charge user fees in certain circumstances. So we're always trying to achieve the right balance between spending and the tax burden. So if you want to add to that a little bit, John.
In my town, we still go to town meeting for budget, so people can talk at town meeting about it. But at town meeting, the budget is then adjourned to referendum automatically. For years, it was always petition to referendum, 200 vote, 200 signatures. So we said, what the heck, if we're going to end up there, let's just do it. So do I love that? No. But it's a reality. It means that there are times we get voted down, like I saw this fall. It took 2 times the town budget here in Clinton. 4? Yeah, my record is 5. But it's not good to not have a budget till the middle of October, but that was my first year there. So what have I done? So we still have an active town meeting process for several things, and I still kind of enjoy the town meeting process, because you just never know what's going to come out of the town meeting. It is the power of the people, and that's what New England kind of was born on. So I do respect it, and almost hate that somehow we've taken the power away from the town meeting to send it to a referendum. Because if you care that much, you should show up. But anyways, that's the way it is. But other issues are still done. Borrowing, when we go to a referendum on borrowing for projects, that obviously is a town meeting and a referendum also. So that varies from town to town. It's usually the mid to larger cities that empower the council to make those decisions too. Yeah. To some level, even bonding or borrowing, they're allowed to. It's all local option on those things.
Right.
We still have the power under state statutes that people can petition for ordinances through town meetings. About 3 years ago, we had an environmental group that petitioned and got passed a anti-fracking waste ordinance. First in the state. It's not our great pleasure, but it is the power of the people. We've had to deal with that because it's now a local law. So a lot of those kind of citizen empowerment things are still around, even though you have to have a manager.
Yeah. So thank you, John. The third question: how can a town manager stabilize mill rate increases? Yes, I'll provide a few examples based on my experience, and John can add on his. In Mansfield, one area where we were very successful was in building a capital fund to cover capital equipment, whether it's a plow truck, fire truck, et cetera, as well as our routine facility needs, improvement in school buildings and town buildings. And what we did is we built a cash to capital program. Cash to capital, what do I mean by that? So every year we were putting about $2.5 million a year coming from the general fund into the capital fund. And that $2.5 million a year allowed us to purchase all of our routine capital needs, even $1 million fire truck, with cash, instead of issuing bonds for it, And that was advantageous to our residents over the long term because they weren't paying the debt service. But that program took several years to build. It was a policy decision made by the council at the recommendation of staff. And those large pieces of equipment, sometimes it would take 4 to 5 years to set aside enough money to acquire them. But then, when we went out and made the purchase, we weren't issuing bonds and paying notes for 10 years, 20 years, what have you. So that was one area, that's one example of how we were able to stabilize the tax rate. We also did a variety of things with respect to economic development that I'll talk about under the last question, because the last question relates to economic development. And then one other example I want to cite from Mansfield, and then turn to John. Mansfield and West Hartford are leaders with respect to providing shared services between the municipal government and the school district. Okay? And sharing services in order to capture an economy of scale, to gain efficiencies. So in Mansfield, there is one Department of Finance shared by both the town and the school system. There's one Department of Information Technology shared by the town and the school district. There's one Department of Facilities shared by both entities. In West Hartford, it's similar, except there's also a shared Department of Human Resources. So that allows us to capture an economy of scale because working together, we don't need as many employees as we would working separately or independently. And there are a handful of municipalities, including Roberts, Plainville, who've made very good progress with shared services. So shared services, that's another example of something we were able to do to gain efficiencies to help stabilize the tax rate.
So one of the things is our vision, our manager's visions, has a longer span. We're not looking towards the next re-election, with all due respect. So we may be willing to look at something that has a longer tenure, something that is more controversial, and try to sell it to our full council. And I'll tell you, one of the things is the council has somebody I always blame. When things don't go right, we jokingly say our job is to make the council look good. And we kind of believe that, because if the council looks good, we look good. But that means that sometimes you need to invest in the future. Some of your programs, to get that stable mill rate, are going to cost money up front, especially when you're talking about things like computerization and upgrading or training employees. You have to sometimes make a one-time investment to get to where you want to go. And once you've identified that through both taking a strategic plan and looking the capital budget, Matt's absolutely right, that's the heart of where you're going to go. If you're not looking what's coming, if you don't have a schedule for all your roofs, all your oil tanks, all the drainage projects, your road work, you should know what you're going to spend. Because if you know what you're going to spend over at least the next 5 years, if not 10 years, then you can get that equalized mill rate. Otherwise, all of a sudden you've got a $4 million project. Now I got to go to bond, your mill rate goes up. So I've tried and I was not as successful to capture as our bond indebtedness went down, to either use that as an opportunity, so our projects are scheduled, looking out, that as the bond goes down, we can afford another bond without raising taxes. And/or, if we don't have a project that's worthwhile to do, take that cash from the declining of the debt service and spend it as cash capital to buy that fire truck or dump truck and this expensive stuff that's really expensive. And there's ways to save money on that too. We've started buying off of, there's a group out of Texas called the Houston-Galveston Area Consortium, HGAC. Any town in Connecticut can buy things from them. They're already pre-bed. You want a fire truck? Price is right there on the webpage. Buy it. You don't have to hire a consultant. You don't have to have a truck committee to do this and come up with all the whiz-bang things. So we bought a fire truck, $150,000 less than the same truck that a neighboring town had, because Houston-Galveston Area Consortium is the biggest equipment buyer in the nation. They get better prices. We just bought an ambulance. It was through that. It was actually built in Eastern Connecticut because they were part of the affiliate. So, and the Spartan fire truck came out of somewhere in Connecticut too, where the final fabrication was done. So there are ways to look at these things long-term and come up with, fairly stable mill rates. Our mill rate has been very, very stable. Sometimes you have to go up just a little bit to stay even, but other times you can, figure out a way to get into next year without doing a lot. We don't try to always go up. We take great pride when we're able to show steady, or once or twice, we've been able to go down a little bit. But a lot of that depends on grand list growth and things are outside. The last few years, the state revenue has been so unpredictable, it's been very difficult. Which is all the more reason our peer in South Windsor talked to the town council. They had a little extra money because the state revenue finally came through that they didn't count on. They created a budget stabilization fund, knowing that it's not going to hold up for long. Somebody's going to decide the state's broke. So they have the money already set to stabilize that. So that's management. That's long-term management. It could have been an easy, cheap trick to lower the taxes, but long-term, you know where you're going to go. So can a manager help stabilize taxes? The answer is a good one can.
Let me just provide a West Hartford example as well, because I'm talking primarily about Mansfield because it's closer in scope to your community. West Hartford's a good size operation, but the community has made significant strides in the area of employee benefits and working to manage them over the long term. Our pension fund is a big issue in West Hartford. But the town has done some good things in recent years. We just negotiated a police contract, and we've got 150 officers in West Hartford, 150 member police department. But we just negotiated a new multi-year contract with them, and there's a new pension plan in place for new hires that dramatically reduces the amount of overtime that can be included in the pension calculation. Another thing that we've done for non-public safety employees, for regular town employees, is we've introduced what's called a hybrid plan. So a hybrid plan has a component of a traditional defined benefit, 1% a year, and then we've added a 401A, which is the public sector version of a 401K on top of that. So it's a shared risk model where both the employer, the town, and the employee are sharing in the risk and managing the pension going forward. So let me turn to the last question that the commission had, and then we'll take questions from the floor. So how does a town manager encourage economic development? I think both in small ways and in large ways. It's everything from extending a welcome to a new business, going out and meeting with them, meeting with them when they have concerns and questions. Maybe they run into a regulatory matter and they need some help resolving it. We're there to help them work through it. Sometimes we have to give them information they don't want to hear, but at the same time, we're there to provide that customer service. We also can work on very large-scale projects, and I'll cite an example from Mansfield. I talked earlier about the new downtown. Several years ago, Mansfield, working with UConn, embarked upon a public-private partnership to build a new downtown. There's no downtown. There wasn't a downtown in stores. Folks wanted to have a true college town like you see in Hanover, like you see in Amherst, like you see in Chapel Hill. When you think about your great college towns around the country, you know, Mansfield stores just didn't have it. And we wanted it. We wanted it for a variety of reasons. So we structured this public-private partnership where the town went out, working with UConn, working with the business community. We formed this independent nonprofit, the Mansfield Downtown Partnership, and we found some private sector partners. And at the end of the day, those partners have constructed a project that's worth $220 million. The private sector developers put about $160, $170 million investment, and the town was able to obtain federal and state grants and one tax abatement that totaled approximately $30 million. So the private developers, they built a new urbanist style mixed-use development. First floor is commercial and retail, primarily food establishments. The upper floors are residential. They're apartments. And it's now the town's largest taxpayer. And the town did not need to issue a dime of debt to make that happen. Our $30 million investment was achieved through the receipt of federal and state grants and a $3.5 million tax abatement that's allowed under state law. My role...
Which is temporary.
Yes, which is temporary. It expires after 7 years. My role was primarily negotiating a development agreement, a very comprehensive development agreement with the two developer parties. I brought in some legal expertise to assist me with that. The developer parties assumed a great deal of our legal costs, and we structured a very comprehensive development agreement in order to protect the town's interest. So that's just an example of a large-scale project, large-scale economic development project, where a town manager can play a very critical role. But as I said at the beginning, it's both in small ways and in large ways.
So, the fact sheet that you have in front of you, you see that Coventry doesn't have a huge tax base. We're on the smaller side of life. Partly is the community's choice to try to remain semi-rural. We're proud of our dairy farms, but I don't view it necessarily as an indicator of health. I always believe that there's healthy balances. So we do have an Economic Development Commission. The town planner, as I mentioned already, the town planner and I staff that. I'm actually missing a meeting tonight to be there, but the planner's there. But we have a different type of economic development strategy. We're not going for the big home run because we don't have the basic infrastructure that will support that. We're not on the highway. We don't have 20,000 students or whatever it is, although they're not too far away. They're 7 miles away. So what we did is look in the mirror and see who we are. We were an old industrial center in the 1800s. It was we had 9 operating mills providing lots of uniforms and munitions for the Civil War, and the Civil War ended, they went broke. But we had some of the old mill buildings. I spent 20 years working on 9 different grants, and we finished it up this year to rebuild the whole Main Street area. So we have textured sidewalks, there were none, period light posts, replaced our whole water system so we can, once I find money for a water tower, we can get Hydrants, why are hydrants important? We need the water pressure to run sprinkler systems. Because if you want mixed use, you want what everyone loves, like in Mystic, you have places you like, and kind of what you did. You want the retail and housing above, and these old Victorian houses. You can't do that under Connecticut Fire Code unless you have sprinklers. So, you know, we have to look long-term, and it took 20 years, and we finished it up. Again, 0 local dollars, but a whole bunch of other grants, DOT money, Main Street money, steep money, but, you know, converted an old stone mill building into a community facility for weddings, trails along the mill stream. So that has now revitalized. Some of the old storefronts are now have, you know, medical offices and other antique stores, and it's becoming an antiquing and food destination, which plays off of Parents' Weekend. It's really good. But that's not enough. So we have different strategies. We do a business visitation where members of our EDC go out and they go out and have standardized questionnaires that we put together to check on business climate. What can we do? What do you need? And so based on some of those, we've been able to go and help people resolve customs issues. Believe it or not, we export to China, and we export to Iraq, Bolivia, and Ecuador. Major soda syrup supplier is in our town. They provide Polar Club soda, but it's all made in our town, the syrups. But they export around the world, and they had a salesman back in Iraq about 3 weeks after the war is over selling Cola Blue and Cola Red. Guess what flavors those are? So they were running into customs issues. So we now, you know, working through the Small Business Administration. Somebody named Linda McMahon, you know, took our call and were able to help them through some of those things. So part of it is, as Matt said, be their advocate, because they get very frustrated. And sometimes no is the answer they get, but at least they have an answer. So part of our role is try to preserve the best of what you got. Don't let them leave. It's harder to attract than keep.
Yeah.
Grow them. We heard that one of our manufacturers that's still in town manufactures sutures, you know, for stitches. Been in that business since the 1800s, originally doing silk fishing line. They were going to get sent to Mexico. The rest of the whole division out of Fall River, where they had 1,000 employees, we only have about 50. We're going to go to Mexico, and we were able to keep them. Not because it's not cheaper down there, but because they have long-standing workers of high quality for living wage jobs. So that was highest priority for us, because those are the good jobs you want. And we were able to talk to corporate people. But we stepped in, we didn't give them money. We gave them respect. We gave them a relationship. We tried to work with them to see whether we could even go there. So they created a laboratory there, playing off with some of the scientists in the facilities at UConn. So some of our statewide investment is also keeping some local businesses in town, so it's great to see. So you have to look at what you have, and every town's going to have a different economic development strategy. Again, very limited water, very limited sewer in town, so we're not going to have, you know, we're not going to have a pickle factory because you need both. A little tip that pickles use a lot of water.
Brew pubs too.
Yeah. Although we do have a honey mead, one of the few honey mead manufacturers just moved to town, but they fit in the house. But we also created some of the friendliest home business regulations around, because that's where the growth is, the small businesses. So our Planning and Zoning Commission was really innovative in coming up with, here's what you can do by right. Basically, if it's not noxious, if you don't have to put a sign out front, and you don't have a lot of people visiting you, more than Amazon Prime trucks, you can just basically come in and get a permit without any to do. And then we have another tier, if you're having a certain number of people show up, like maybe a massage therapist or something like that, not a lot of cars, a little bit, most of the time nobody will notice. It's a very simple process. And then to get into where you have more people, you have to go through it more formally, have a little bit more effort to land to do that. So those simple regulatory changes really grew a whole segment. So now that we have these home businesses, what do? One of those empty buildings that we had in our village area now has offices by the hour that you can rent. So these small businesses don't have to meet with some people in their kitchens. They can rent an office with a photocopier and a professional presence, and you don't have to lock your dog up while you're meeting with customers. So it's all a package, and you have to have the vision. But a lot of that came through our Economic Development Commission. And we did the standard marketing brochures and so forth. And I have a lot of relationships over the years that I developed with developers. We invited them in last time we did our plan of conservation and development to do a big meeting with them. And they said, you know, you're one of the first towns that ever talked to developers before you did a plan. And they appreciate it. They gave us feedback and we listened to it. And those that we agreed to, we could work in. But those relationships are still there. And now we're trying to work with our neighboring town that has sewers at the edge of our border. We've worked out a deal, so we're going to expand, kind of do a joint two-town kind of business district. And that's still in process, and again, that's going to be a long-term, as Matt knows. When you get into that type of project, it's long-term, not short-term. But you got to still work on it. You got to start. You got to take that first step.
Yeah, play to your strengths. So any other questions from the commission?
I think right now, just at some point, we'd love to have you give a 10-minute idea about procedures and what works best in terms of the hiring process but I have a feeling the crowd would love to ask questions of you now, and this would probably be the best time.
All right, sir.
Staying with economic development for a minute, we have several commercial businesses in town that have been closed for many years. And we, on our own, have been unable to attract new investment into these sites. Can you tell us what, you did touch on it just briefly, but can you tell us what you would do to go out and solicit or attract people to come and even look at these sites to see if they're feasible for them to even use?
Well, the first thing you have to do is make sure that the property owner wants it to be developed. When you're dealing with large grocery store type things, sometimes they want to keep it off the market. They don't want competition. Stop and Shop is notorious for that, where they will build a new facility and they will keep the old one to keep it off the market to keep any other grocery store. So step one, do they want to develop it? So that's meeting with them. Step two is to do kind of a profile. I go to a site called ESRI. You can buy reports, they're like $50 a piece. You can do a market analysis. So you can put a pinpoint on that map and do a radius of whatever you want. If you're looking for a food service like a grocery store, it's a 10-mile radius because anything over 10 miles, the ice cream melts. But so you can see what it produces something called a leakage report. So in my town, I can tell you right now, based on credit card sales, my community buys $1.8 million of auto parts a year. I don't have an auto parts store. Why not? So we gather the information for them, put it together in our brochures, and then we'll go out and try to target to say, look, here's the facts. You know, we can support this based on this national data. The SRI is a database person, but it's all public. You can go on their site, esri.com. They'll usually give you a free sample too. So you have to do research. You have to have a plan. A lot of those big spaces now are being converted to recreational uses. In Manchester, Bob's store, not Bob's Discount Furniture, Bob's clothing store, is becoming a sports amusement facility. Indoor golf carts, they said paragliders. I can't believe that was going to happen in that particular one because it's not that tall. Crash. But you know, indoor nets, trampolines, all those types of things. So retail is tough. I mean, you've got Amazon is killing that brick and mortar business. Not to be judgmental whether it's good or bad, because they've created other jobs, and it's helped our economy in terms of our pocketbooks of saving money and the ease of getting a broader selection of things. But some of that local retail is not going to be here, so you got to find other uses for it. So sometimes you have a big building, you break it up. Right now, the medical office complex is still a hot market, so that's who we're trying to go for, because we don't have a lot of medical offices in the town. So you got to see where those gaps are. So somebody has to analyze that information that's readily available and then develop a target.
If I could just add to that briefly. I think it's also important to understand the building's characteristics and its needs. Are there environmental issues? And depending on that, there are potentially state and federal grant monies available that oftentimes the town is the only eligible applicant. For example, in Mansfield, as part of that downtown project, the developer ran into some unanticipated environmental conditions at one of the sites. So we were able to apply for a state grant and pass those proceeds on to the developer through a subsidiary agreement. So understanding what the building's needs are, what the facilities needs are there also opportunities maybe to assemble properties in the form of one package? That might be more palatable to a developer, development entity as well. I saw a hand in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Could you repeat the questions? We can't hear them back.
Okay.
That was economic development.
Yes. What can we do for empty, vacant commercial properties in particular to help move those?
And I had the same, I had an old mill building. We were able to get it cleaned up through the state brownfields program, and through flipping the building, paid that loan back. So we were doing the effort to do that. In other cases, we've done tax incentives for a limited period of time. Some of those were to make the building look nicer than they wanted it to look like. We have design standards so that we have a sense of place for our community, but we're willing to reduce their future taxes. One of my council members said, getting something later is better than getting nothing today. So we're willing to take a little less up front to get the style and the feel of what we want, because then the neighbors have to match it. So I think we had some other back there.
Yes, sir.
We'll come back.
Yes, I apologize if you've already covered this. I want to know what kind of relationship we would have with the other component to our budget, which would be our school system, superintendent of schools. What types of things do you bring to the table to that component?
Well, I think it's important in my experience.
Repeat
So
the question.
the question is, how important or what do you do to develop and maintain a good working relationship with the school district, the Board of Ed, the superintendent's office?
Particularly with the budgeting aspects.
Yeah, okay, particularly the budgeting components. So first of all, I think the relationship is critical, and it's important that the manager ideally meet with the superintendent of schools on something of a regular basis to talk about items of mutual interest and concern. I talked about the fact that in Mansfield and in West Hartford, we have shared departments, so that helps build that common interest. And one of the benefits of those shared departments, it's not just the money you save, but it's the relationship you build with the school district, because you're interfacing on a much regular basis. On the budget, I think going into the budget season, and in Connecticut, typically the Board of Education, the school district is ahead of the town in terms of when they start their process. It's important for the town manager, the superintendent, and the respective finance directors to sit down and talk about the community's needs and what their respective elected boards are looking for and what they think they would support. Charters vary in Connecticut in a handful of cases, but very limited. A town manager might have the ability to unilaterally reduce a budget presented by the superintendent of schools, but that's very rare. That's very rare. Typically, it's only the town council. Once the budget gets to the town council can make adjustments to the Board of Ed budget, subject to limitations set by the state. But the real work is long before the budget is presented. You know, it's the town manager talking with the superintendent of schools, what are the district's needs, what are the town's needs, how are we going to work together in partnership to present a budget that our boards and our community will support.
Would you look at historic patterns in order to determine what your goals would be for, let's say, the town side?
That's always helpful information, yes, to look at trends. Did you want to add to that?
Sure. We have separate finance offices, although we're right across the parking lot from each other, go figure. I have a really good, we have a long tenured superintendent too, he's been there 9 years. We have a really good relationship. We work at it. Doesn't mean that we agree on everything, but we know that it's in our common interest to perform better together than we would separately. So we try to develop examples of cooperation. I helped them implement a preschool. They had 4 portable classrooms behind their middle school that they were able to free up by moving them into the main building. And we got some smart start classroom money, but he didn't know how to do the construction. So we teamed him up with the design build team to get those portable classrooms converted to places that have toilets that are this tall in 2 months, in the summer months. And he knows that he couldn't do it. And while we were there, we changed their parking lot and put up, through a power purchase agreement, carports with solar panels so they can take their kids out of their car seats in the rain and not get rained on. So we have a good working relationship, especially on things like school security grants. They work with our police department. On the budget, we're not a bifurcated budget like your charter looks like you have separate. I saw your annual report, you have separate votes on education and town. In our town, it's 1 vote. So we go up or down together, so there is no benefit for us to fight. So I kind of believe in that, but again, other philosophies differ, that people should have the right to make a distinction. But we go up or down together, and the capital projects, those are really run through the town with the school building committee, but we're running no show, and they know, we know more about it because that's not their bailiwick, it's not their strength. So we have to partner, because those are the areas of, you could really, on those big projects, you could really screw up if you don't do them right. So we respect their role and try to stay out of it. Our elected officials sometimes clash, and to try to deal with that, the question hasn't come up on how we deal with finances. We don't have a board of finance. I see your proposed charter doesn't have a board of finance either. That's a good thing in my opinion. But I've worked in towns with both, and there's a lot of bickering between the board of finance and the council over whose turf it is, so I think it's easier. But what we do in our town is we have a finance subcommittee of the council. So 3 members plus the chair is an ex officio, non-voting member of that committee, and we have another one on steering and policy where we deal with the policy issues, the ordinances, and so forth. So we meet separately, and those committees have no independent authority to bring it back to the whole council. But the finance committee of the council meets with the fiscal committee of our Board of Education 4 times a year. So if there are issues related to financing, that's the opportunity for the elected officials to try to either vent or get on the same page. So we've tried to work through those issues to try to make a better working relationship. The state, the way the state has set it up, it's purposely antagonistic because we're all fighting for tight resources. We have to do our best to stop that. You're not going to always succeed, but it's the way the system is set for whatever reason. Otherwise, they would have given them independent taxing authority, like New York.
Question up front, and then we'll get to the back.
We lived in Mansfield for 14 years, and we left because there was no center in Mansfield. The fact that you created that, and we know how hard it was, is almost a miracle. Now, that alone instructs me to vote for a town manager, but I would vote for you as a
Well, you
It was
did
a
grow
team
up here.
effort.
You did grow up here.
And, you know, as I said, we really know how hard it was because we were part of that too. And it is amazing what you have achieved. It is astounding when you drive to, you know, through Mansfield. But the question I have is that, you know, why should we have a town manager? I'm looking at these numbers and they're very interesting. You both have higher mill rates than we do, for example. We are the poorest town, according to a Yale study of a few years ago in Habitat, which I took part in. We're the poorest town on the shoreline. And we have the highest rate of 10% of poverty. What would you do to address the question of poverty if you were to take a job in our town?
First off, I'll say, please don't compare mill rates. Because, don't compare mill rates. Because I have a mill rate of 31.2. My average house cost is 120, the assessment on the average house is $124,000. What's your average assessment in town?
That's a good question.
174.
Yeah, so right there alone, if you just do the ratio, my mill rate's lower than, my actual tax bill is lower.
Yeah, your tax bills.
So you have to be really careful on mill rates. To answer your question, boy, we could get a Nobel Peace Prize for that. Poverty
Go for
is,
it, yeah.
And then I'll add on.
yeah, poverty is just tough. So you have to, because what it does is it drives some of your expenses. You have to recognize that you have other needs that other communities may not have. So you've got to take care of your own community. Just have to. So you look at those things, but it's a path to self-sufficiency. It depends where your poverty is. If it's senior poverty, that's a tougher thing, because are you going to ask people who are retired and on fixed income to go to work? And that may be the only solution. Because you got to get more income stream. I believe it's also a statewide problem. I mean, the tax commission that I spent a lot of time on, most states have a property tax that's based also on income. And that would solve these problems. So there's a certain
Based on what?
income. In some cases, you have, and we had a property tax credit that they've gotten rid of most of it, except for the lowest of the poor people. But there are many states that their property taxes, you get a larger income tax credit, or if you don't pay income taxes, you get an earned income tax credit, EIT, which is like the federal government can refund you money that you didn't even pay. So it's a subsidy thing. But the alternative is that they may become homeless. If you don't have health care and can't afford health care, those costs go up. Those are high costs to society. So you have to look at a bigger picture. But again, no one town is going to fix that on their own. Part of it is to find supporting mechanisms like fuel banks and energy conservation means to reduce their expenses. A good human service office that will look through their financials and say, hey, I don't even have the gold star package of the cable TV company. You have to reduce your expenses. I mean, there are realities that everybody has to work on it, not just solve their problem. So you have to give them the tools to look at it. By the way, look at YouTube TV. It's only like $14. It's a problem, and I was surprised to see those numbers.
Let me add to your response, John, because your larger question is why should Clinton consider the council manager a form of government?
That's right.
The same reason, for the same reasons any other municipality in the country would. So one of the key benefits of the council manager form that we've only touched on very tangentially is the fact that the manager is there for the long haul.
Yeah.
You know, he or she, we're not running for election every 2 years. And in government and in local government, things take time. They take time, they take focus, they take dedication to achieve. Another benefit of the form, when you look at your other professional staff, your department heads, what have you, studies have shown that council manager communities are able to attract and retain a higher level of talent. A higher level of talent because they are reporting to a professional with a background in local government.
So I notice right now you're recruiting for a finance director,
Yeah.
a town planner, and a zoning agent.
Exactly.
You're not going to have a lot of economic development.
And Public Works,
And public works too?
yes.
Yeah, probably.
So those are some big holes to fill. And I can tell you, because my staff tells me that, and I'm sure you've had people too, that the people that we brought in said, I won't go work for a politician. Because then they get the request, will you donate to my campaign? And all those things. That doesn't happen.
We lost the finance director because of that. She went to Newington where there was a town manager. Said she just didn't like having to work for somebody new every 2 years.
We hear that all the time.
Yeah, the turnover can be tough, but at the same time, there are some fabulous,
There are.
fabulous first
There are
selectmen
some really
in
good
this state.
Yeah, we've had,
Should we go to this gentleman in the back?
Yeah, then what can
Thank you. First of all, I just want to thank you guys for coming down and sharing your experience. And we may have laughed a little bit, but the fact is that you were probably two of the shinier examples of town managers in this state. And I did just a little bit of research, and I think out of 169 municipalities in the state, there's only, what, 28 towns maybe that?
Roughly
have a
35.
town manager? Okay.
Roughly 35 that have a
It's
version
real
of the form.
minority. So there's, you know, I've wrestled with this like everyone else here has. First of all, it's about a 50% increase in salary to pay a town manager. Secondly, you don't know what you're gonna get. Again, you guys, you know, nothing against you guys, you seem to know what you're doing, and you have some results to show. But there's some kind of conflicts of interest that you touched on a little bit. That being, for example, your ultimate obligation is to implement the town council's wishes, is what it sounded like. And yet, in the code of ethics, it says you're to do what's in the best interest of the people. And when I was doing my research, there's a lot of town managers who have gotten fired. And many of them say it's simply because they didn't do what the town council wanted them to do. And in Meriden, just earlier this year, a town manager was fired for uncovering wrongdoings within the administration. Now, my questions to you are this. Ultimately, if a town manager has a conflict between what he thinks is right and what's best for the townspeople, and on the other hand, what the majority of this town council is telling him to do, what does he do? And we have a town meeting form of government, and this town was established so that the people elected the person who would be basically directing the town. In this case, correct me if I'm wrong, but theoretically, 4 individuals could hire that town manager. Basically, if he has to do the wishes of the town council. Right, so that's the next question. The search committee, how much first of all, is there a search company that should be utilized because they might be better equipped to analyze these prospective town managers? And if so, because I read where in most cases that's what's implemented is a search committee similar to what we did with the finance manager search, which didn't result in anyone being hired. But what would we be looking at for an expense? And what is a town manager do when there's a conflict? Like this guy is still in the town. And it sounds as though he did what he thought was morally correct. He uncovered something that was done, that wasn't correct, that was illegal or whatever. And secondly, how long? So this contract, let's say the town council decides we don't like what he's doing, we want to get rid of him. How much of his contract should the town have to pay him when he leaves?
Well, a lot of those things, we'll start maybe at the end and go back. In terms of your contract, your charter's calling for a 3-year contract. So if you're wise, when you negotiate that contract, you would have some type of severance clause beyond that, shorter than that. So that if there's a disagreement. But some of that, your charter is saying you have to have a 3-year contract, which means the person can't stay more than 3 years unless renewed. So you have a built-in check. But you'd want some other out clause beyond that. So depending on the person, I mean, if the council can fire me with 5 votes any night, but they gotta pay me. I have a severance clause.
How long is that, can we ask?
When I first started, it was 3 months, and now it's 9 months. As I got married and had children, it became more important to me. So, I mean, you gotta think about that. So, as to the issues, let me just say, that's merited. And it's under FBI investigation, so let's set that one aside. Because there have been issues in Meriden, even with a bad manager. Just having a manager doesn't mean that person is always honest. Whatever career you have bad doctors, you have bad attorneys. So there's a Meriden had a manager probably 25 years ago that did steal money. So, in any career there's people. In terms of the process to hire a manager, there's lots of ways. When I was hired, the council put together a search committee like most school boards do. Some school boards are now hiring consultants, but they brought in citizens and they brought a mix of people in. I spent a whole day there going around with people, and you can talk about your process in West Hartford. A lot of times now, they do hire a recruiting firm because for some reason it's a little hard to get people to think about Connecticut right now. So they're a little bit more regressive, but there's firms out of Massachusetts and Virginia. I don't know what they charge. Randy Frank does stuff. What she does money?
I think utilizing a search firm is a good recommended practice because they have a nationwide network and they can advise the hiring committee with respect to how to best structure a contract and what a good community process would look like when hiring a manager. So you also asked, how should a manager handle a potential conflict of interest if he or she strongly disagrees with an action that the board is contemplating? I think it's incumbent on the manager to make their position known. To make their position known, particularly if there's anything questionable about ethics, law, etc. But even if it's strictly a decision based on merit, the manager should make their position known as part of their recommendations. However, when the council votes, when the council takes a lawful vote, even if it's contrary to what the manager recommended, the manager needs to implement the decision set by the council. That's part of our job. We need to respect their policy decisions. Or if it's something that touches on ethics or law or something that makes a manager feel extremely comfortable, we also have the option of resigning. And many managers will do that when they're pushed to do something that they feel is unethical and is wrong for the community in a very significant way.
I have a quick question about...
This gentleman's been asking for a while. I'm sorry, sir, you already had a question, so I want to get to the gentleman who just stood up. Sir, right over here.
Oh, okay, well,
Yeah.
okay, I'll make it real quick and everything. I'm trying to get convinced that a town manager is the proper thing to do. Okay, now we've heard all these things about, how things are worked in the infrastructure and jurisdictional lines and roles within a town government. But I want to know, now when I was working, when I hired people, I always asked them a situational exercise. Here's one, okay, and this burns us up every single year. Our budget for, like, I'll give you an example, snow removal. It's so ridiculously low that it's exhausted in like no time, right? First 2, 3 snowstorms, it's gone. But there's always the money there to hire overtime for snow removal people, companies, on a preferred basis. Now, it's interesting you brought up Tammany Hall, because it seems like the same people are tapped every single time for the overtime. As a town manager, do you have the autonomy to look at the town budget item, not just snow removal, but any budget item, and say, geez, I think we're going to have like a blizzard or two, and it looks really bad. How about we pump up this line item? Do you have the authority to take that from other areas in the budget that are being underutilized?
Well, first of all, we're the ones who developed the proposed budget. So we're going to look at historical trends. And if a current program, if we feel as though a current program or line item is underfunded, especially chronically so, we're going to recommend an adjustment there. There may be other line items that are overfunded, where we could reduce accordingly. So we're going to craft a proposed budget that we think is accurate and that's not understated or overstated. However, once a budget is adopted, once you have a legally adopted budget and you're facing an overrun in a particular line, it depends upon your charter. In many communities, a manager can make those adjustments up to a certain level, but anything more significant will require approval of the town council. But it's important for the manager to identify, all year long, we're doing monthly and quarterly financial reports that we share with our town council. And all year long, we are recommending more modest budget adjustments based on experience.
And good purchasing procedures would stop the other issue if it's an insider.
It's interesting you bring that up, because my only other question, and I'll turn it over, I'm sorry, it seems like I'm hogging here. The role of the town manager is to negotiate with outside agencies, okay? Suppose you have an issue where there's a project to be done in town, all right? And you worked with this construction company up in Mansfield. They did a great job for you and everything, but we have local companies here that could do the exact same thing. What are the checks and balances that would prevent you from saying, I'll hire my buddy up in Mansfield and ignore the people here in Clinton?
The point John just made, you need to have good, strong purchasing policies that are based on merit. The point I made earlier, we're hiring the best company for the town based on their qualifications, not based on our connections, not based on the council's connections. And you need to have policies that help put that in place, and you need to adhere to the policies and build in safeguards where you're annually sharing that information with the council and the community at large.
So our purchasing policies for professional services, we tend to go for qualification based, where we bring the people in and then negotiate the fee. But we bring a committee in, where you may bring a town engineer from another town, so there's 3 or 4 people to do interviewing. And we publicly advertise for the job. So I do a bridge project, I may get 30 applications, we'll screen it down to, say, 6 to 10, spend a day interviewing them, and have independent scoring sheets to tally it.
So it's strictly the lowest bid?
Not necessarily, it's qualification based. So it depends on the type of thing. If it's a commodity, it's generally low bid. If it's a professional services, sometimes you get what you pay for. So you have to be careful. So there's a difference for things like architects, attorneys, and some other of those professional services where we don't always go at the lowest bid. If there's a question in our purchasing policy where we're looking for an exemption, that has to be voted on by the council. So I can't deviate unless I bring it to the council and say, hey, I need you to waive bids on this one. And here's why.
Low bids can be problematic, especially for big projects like a school project, etc. That's why it's much better to have a pre-qualification process where you're qualifying who can then bid on the project. Our lowest responsible bid or even a best value approach. Low bid can really bite you. Yes, ma'am, and then the question, the gentleman behind you.
So I'm still having a hard time balances are with respect to transparency and accountability if the town manager doesn't behave as you're suggesting he or she should? Because, and you obviously are in ideal situations, and you've been in your roles for a long time, but a town manager coming in here will be coming in, possibly we recruit someone from another part of the country, and that person is going to be new to all of our experiences. So what is to prevent the town council from exerting a kind of political influence on this new town manager that results in fact, the same conflicts of interest that we have or could have under our current system?
Want me to start? So the question, as hopefully folks all heard about it, is if you decide to proceed with the council manager form of government and you're hiring your first manager, what's to prevent him or her from acting unethically, or what's to prevent a town council from putting undue pressure on him or her to act inappropriately? So first of all, I think it's important for any community to have a good, strong ethics ordinance in place that can help address that with a board of ethics or another enforcement mechanism. As we talked about earlier, within our profession, I would look to hire a manager who's a member of ICMA. Because if he or she is a member of ICMA, we are responsible for adhering to our own code of ethics. And if we don't, we can be sanctioned by our peers. So that's a recommendation I would have there.
What's ICMA?
ICMA is the International City and County Management Association. And we're roughly 14,000 members worldwide. Most of our members are in North America, the U.S. and Canada.
But if I just might interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Being sanctioned by ICMA doesn't seem as onerous to me as being fired because you didn't go along with the council. So how do you deal with that?
Well, it's also the council's job too, right? The manager is typically the only employee that's hired by and reports to the council.
So at some point, the community has to accept responsibility for electing good council.
Yeah.
I mean,
And you need to structure a good, fair contract with the manager that protects the town's interest.
so will there from time to time be stumbles? Yes. But what's the probability? The probability is better that it's going to work. Hard to believe, the city of Hartford had a city manager. Wasn't that long ago.
For decades.
For decades. They had one of the best finance offices, most respected in the nation. They were AAA bond rated.
That's the highest you can achieve.
Highest bond rating.
West Hartford has that.
So they got rid of the manager. We joked, it's not going to take long before someone gets arrested. We didn't think it was going to take 3 mayors to get arrested, and we didn't think they were going to go down to the bottom bond level at the speed they did. So what are your odds? I mean, that's what life is about. What has the higher probability of working? IBM did a study. They said that towns that have a council manager plan, and according to their study, are 10% more efficient.
That article is on the website, and also the organization that they mentioned, the ICMA, is also on the website. If you go to ClintonCharterCoalition.org, all these articles are up there for you to read and look at. The IBM studies there, and also the organization that they refer to, there's links to that website.
So there's no guarantees. We told you, it's a partnership. And that partnership means that both sides have to be willing. And either side of that partnership may not work. You just have higher odds that it's going to work. But there's got to be respect, and there's got to be work. And the first one in, it's not easy. Tom Simsbury just changed to a council manager plan. Things seem to be going very well. They hired his former assistant. So she's taken.
And she's great. She's great.
So it depends. And so you may want to, anyone has a question? call somebody in Simsbury and ask how it's going, because they just changed. But someone also mentioned it's not that common in Connecticut. There's another form, town administrator. There's a lot of small towns with first selectmen that have town administrators.
It's part-time first selectman and a full-time town administrator.
So-
Town administrator doesn't have quite as much authority as a town manager, but it is professional management.
So three of my neighbors, Bolton, Columbia, and Andover, you may not see on a list of manager planned communities, but they have a professional guy or woman in both the situation that were hired for what they know, not who they know. And, you know, they have all three of them have MBAs.
Yeah, yeah. So the gentleman in the back with the hat, he's had his hand up, then this lady, then this gentleman here.
And then we probably should wrap it up.
Okay,
I
okay.
think we can stay afterwards.
Yep. Yes,
What
sir.
we're proposing is for a town manager. Can you tell me whether or not there's going to be, support staff that would have to be included, whether it be a first round or would that be a second round? You mentioned you had support staff. I assume those are salaries that are added on to your position.
Well, I have an admin person.
Just an admin?
Yeah, and she runs our town webpage and takes minutes for the council meetings and all the subcommittee meetings and so, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, so I don't have anyone more than that. I mean, I have a finance director that I didn't have, that was the one admin person that left. So,
I wasn't sure if you had like 5 direct reports.
no, I mean, at some point, I do talk to them that they ought to start thinking about succession planning. And if they want to have a smooth succession, they maybe want to start thinking about having some type of assistant that could come in. But I don't have that. And I was offered it once and then felt the town couldn't afford it, so I chose not to do it.
Yeah.
Really short. So if you guys know, generally, what is the term? The proposal we have is 3 years. Is that standard?
Yeah, it can be. You also see an indefinite term. I have an indefinite term in West Hartford.
That's what I have to.
So, that means the council can let me go at any point if they have sufficient votes and they need to adhere to the provisions in my contract. Mansfield had a rolling 3-year term. So
Standard more for like the superintendents usually have that.
correct. So it's a 3-year contract, and every 3 years we would renegotiate the terms, or there was an opportunity to renegotiate the terms. Typically, that didn't happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Sir?
So it sounds like what you have is what I would consider at-will employment.
Yes.
So the council could fire you at any time, but you also could walk out the door at any time. What is the rate of turnover? Is there an ICMA website where you guys can see where the latest jobs are? In case you want to go look someplace else,
Yes, there is.
okay?
And you're welcome to look at it. Because the salaries may be there. So, yeah, you can consider us at will. I mean, I have to give notice to allow transition.
What's standard for ethics for ICMA?
Well, a couple standards. First off, you're not supposed to job jump. So, what is it, 3 years?
2 years
2
minimum.
years. 2 years
minimum when you're coming into a new community.
So unless it's untenable, unless something was surprising, then there's an outlaw. They're not going to do indentured service. But you're supposed to not job jump. I mean, again, I chose for my personal reasons to stay. I was offered other jobs at more money, but it was better for my family situation. I lived next to my mother-in-law. We had horses. So moving to a place where we could accommodate those things financially wasn't worth it. And I still had challenges that were still invigorating. So, I mean, that's another thing. And so I asked myself that question more than the financial side. Am I making a difference? Because to me, that's what matters. Do I feel that I'm helping? The minute I feel that I am not helping the community, I either change careers or go somewhere else. Because that's how I was brought up. So I think there's a strong feeling of that. But, you know, everyone has their own reasons, but to me, it's a commitment, and I believe that, you know, there's a certain long term, but if you're not happy, then you're not performing well. That's true at any job. So you should probably leave. And that was kind of my answer to one of these other things. At some point, if you're being made to do things that you feel are wrong, I can tell you what I would quit over. I would quit over somebody asking me to do something that is discriminating against a protected class. I would submit immediately, because that's who I am. I can't stand that, and I won't be part of that. I don't want that as part of my legacy. So if somebody was discriminating in any way against somebody and trying to do that, even if it was mostly legal, I'd be out the door. I don't want that. So everyone has their own standards in every career.
Yeah, let me add briefly to John's answer. So I think the national standard for tenure for a manager is about 7 years or so.
7 years.
But in Connecticut, we're fortunate to have some very long tenured managers. And that's because Connecticut, despite how we complain about taxes and everything else, Connecticut generally, especially in a community like this, has great quality of life. And we have many, many managers who stay 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. John, what John's working on, we have, I think, Bob Weichsel in Southington probably has the national record, where he was manager in Southington for 43 years.
Was it 43?
43 years. Now, maybe some might say that's a little too long, but that just shows the level of commitment and the fact that Connecticut has many quality communities where people will stay a good long time.
What's the typical salary of a starting
It
town manager in a town this size?
It depends. Okay, so on a town this size, and I'm sorry, I didn't look at your housing prices. What would you say? Maybe 130, 140, maybe a range of 130 to 150. So something in there.
So I think it depends on how much it costs to live. You don't have a residency requirement per se. It's negotiable. So if they can move somewhere else that has a little less cost of housing, then you can maybe save a little. It's more complicated now, and actually I think that's really wise not to have a residency requirement. If they can live here, it's a good thing. But with dual income families, you have to get real. That sometimes the commuting distance for a spouse is also an issue. The new hire Simsbury, were they 154 or something like that?
Something like that. But that's kind of a
but
premier
that's
bedroom.
that's an expensive. The house is there, 350,000 or so, starting.
I don't think you would need to do that.
I make in the middle of the whole state of Connecticut, and I'm like 142. So somewhere in that range, maybe a little lower, maybe a little higher. Depends on the number of years experience, and frankly, I wouldn't recommend that I'd recommend that you look at your superintendent's salary, and then your assistant superintendent's salary, and then your high school principal's salary, and say, how much less do I really think that this person who's going to work a lot of hours is worth?
Exactly.
Because there's an equity issue. So I think if you get the right person, they will more than make up for whatever salary you're paying. So that's the key. I mean, again, don't hire the cheapest attorney. They may spend a lot more hours, so you end up paying more because they don't know what they're doing. So you have to be careful.
Last question. Should we hire somebody from Connecticut?
I think you should hire the best
That knows
person for the job.
everybody.
The best person for the job. I wouldn't go into it limiting yourself in that manner.
If there's two people that equal, yes. If not, a good manager will take the time to ramp up, but by calling and getting a support network, who do I call? They can come up to speed probably in 6 months. It will take a full year to go through the cycle every year. So the true effectiveness will happen more in year 2. But there are advantages to know who to call, but I think those are all going out the window come January when we have whoever it is, a new governor and all new department heads. I'm telling my staff, if you got anything to do with the state, get a decision now. Because you're not going to get a decision in January, February, or March, because you'll have new people. You won't even know who to call. So, that's part of the sage wisdom that we try to give out, like, now, please.
Thank you so much. Art, as a member of the, former member of the Charter Revision, to talk about the ballot and, or Ellen, do you want to talk about the ballot?
A couple of things. When you go to vote on the 6th, the town manager question is question 3. If you are in favor of a town manager, you need to vote yes on question 3. You've probably seen signs around town saying yes on question 3. There is also a question 4 on the ballot, but question 4 conflicts with question 3. If you vote yes on question 4 also, your ballot is invalid. You need to vote yes on question 3 and skip question 4 to vote for the town manager. It's a badly designed question. It's one reason we need a good town manager, so we don't get this kind of conflict again. The first two ballot questions are state questions. We have no position on those. Read the Hartford Current to find out about questions 1 and 2. We are concerned with question 3. Question 3 is the town manager question. If you want to keep up with some of the things, refresh yourself about what you've heard tonight. www.clintoncharterreform.org. We all got a postcard in the mail. That's part of the reason you're here tonight, probably. Our website is on that postcard. We have some Q&A up here. Our website is on the Q&A if you want to take that.
We will also put the information that Matt and John, the handouts, we will scan those and put those on the website for you. The one thing that is going to sound a little beggy is that a small group, bipartisan of us, have propelled this discussion and gotten you here tonight. And so the money that paid for the flyers, paid for the stakes about vote free has come out of our pockets. If anybody wanted to kick in $5 or $10, there's a way to do that on the website to defray some of the costs of print.
Or if you don't want to do it on the website, we have some forms and we'll take a check or cash tonight. But we are a bipartisan grassroots group. We are not affiliated with a political party. We're not affiliated. The sad fact of life is that freedom isn't free, and that we have paid for signs, advertising, postcards, and everything else. We sure appreciate a bit of help.
This video provided as a public service by Kirk Carr, the Kirkster. Thank you for watching.